At 9:13 a.m. on July 6, 1944, test pilot Heini Dittmar climbed into the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet at the Peenemünde test facility in northern Germany. The aircraft, positioned on the runway, weighed just over 4,000 pounds. It lacked landing gear and was supported only by a wheeled dolly that would be dropped once airborne. The plane had enough rocket fuel for exactly 7 minutes of powered flight. If everything went according to plan, Dittmar was about to break the speed record and fly faster than any human had flown before. The weather was perfect, clear skies and light winds. Dittmar had flown the Me 163 before, but never at full throttle, never pushing it to its maximum limit. Today was different. The engineers had carefully calculated every factor, knowing the aircraft's theoretical top speed and the stress it could withstand. Yet, the gap between theory and reality can be vast, especially when flying at speeds never before attempted. The engineers knew this flight could be deadly. The Me 163 had already claimed the lives of several pilots during its testing phase. The rocket fuel was highly volatile, capable of dissolving flesh on contact, and the aircraft had no ejection seat. If something went wrong at high speed, Dittmar would have only moments to act before the plane disintegrated. But speed was crucial now. Germany was losing the war. Allied bombers filled the skies, and German fighters could no longer compete with their escorts. The Luftwaffe needed something revolutionary, something fast enough to reach bomber formations before Allied fighters could intercept them. The Me 163 was their answer. Designed by glider engineer Alexander Lippisch, it was a rocket-powered tailless aircraft. On paper, it was the future of aviation. In reality, it was killing pilots faster than it was destroying enemy bombers. Dittmar had been testing versions of the Me 163 since 1941. On October 2, 1941, he had set a world speed record of 1,042.5 kilometers per hour in an earlier prototype. That flight had been remarkable. Dittmar had taken off from Peenemünde in the Me 163 V4, an unpowered glider towed to altitude by a Messerschmitt Bf 110. At 3,000 meters, he released from the tow plane, ignited the Walter rocket motor, and accelerated faster than any propeller-driven aircraft could dream of. He reached 1,042.5 kilometers per hour in level flight, becoming the first human to break the 1,000 kilometers per hour barrier. The flight lasted only a few minutes before the fuel ran out, but it proved that rocket propulsion could achieve speeds impossible for conventional planes. However, that record was set with an older, less powerful engine. The Me 163A had been a proof of concept, showing that rocket-powered flight was viable. Today's test was different. Dittmar would push the Me 163 BV-18 to its absolute limit. The aircraft had been upgraded with a new dual-chamber Walter HWK-509A rocket motor, offering more power, more thrust, and more speed. Engineers estimated it could reach 1,100 kilometers per hour, or 700 miles per hour faster than any aircraft with wings had ever flown. At 9:16, Dittmar signaled he was ready. The ground crew stepped back, and the rocket motor ignited. Flames erupted from the tail, and the Me 163 began to accelerate faster than Dittmar had ever experienced, lifting off the runway. The dolly detached, and for the next 3 minutes, Dittmar climbed straight up at an angle that would stall any conventional fighter. The Me 163 climbed like a missile, passing 6,000 meters, then 8,000 meters, and finally reaching 10,000 meters. At 12,000 meters, Dittmar leveled off and pushed the throttle to the maximum. The rocket motor roared to life. The aircraft surged forward, and the speedometer quickly climbed past 1,000 kilometers per hour. then 1,100, reaching 1,130 kilometers per hour, 702 miles per hour. But then Dittmar felt a violent shudder. The rudder surface began to flutter. At those speeds and altitudes, the aerodynamic forces were tearing the tail apart. Dittmar immediately cut the engine. The rocket motor shut down, and the cockpit fell silent except for the wind rushing past the canopy. He was now gliding, with no power and no way to restart the engine. At 12,000 meters above northern Germany, with most of his vertical rudder about to separate, Dittmar had only 8 minutes to get the aircraft back to the ground before he ran out of altitude. He gently nosed down, shedding speed and trying to avoid putting more strain on the damaged rudder. The Me-163 glided, much like the sailplane it was derived from. Dittmar, a skilled glider pilot, knew how to handle an unpowered aircraft. But this was different. He was descending in a plane structurally failing at high altitude. He descended through 8,000 meters, 6,000, and 4,000 meters. The runway at Peenemünde came into view. Dittmar lined up for the landing approach. The Me-163 had no landing gear. It relied on a retractable skid beneath the fuselage. This was a one-chance landing. If he hit too hard, the aircraft would cartwheel. If he came in too shallow, he would overshoot the runway. At 300 meters altitude, Dittmar committed to the approach. The aircraft dropped rapidly toward the runway. The ground rushed up. At the last moment, Dittmar pulled back on the stick, flaring the aircraft just before landing. The skid hit the concrete, and the plane skidded down the runway, trailing sparks. When it finally came to a halt, Dittmar had survived. Was alive. The Me-163 was damaged but intact. And Heini Dittmar had just set an unofficial world speed record that would stand for 3 years to 702 miles per hour. After landing, the engineers who inspected the aircraft found that nearly the entire vertical rudder had detached due to flutter during the high-speed run. A few more seconds at full speed, and the plane would have broken apart mid-air. Dittmar had reached the absolute limit of what was aerodynamically achievable in 1944. However, there was a bitter irony. The Me-163 Komet, the fastest aircraft in the world, was nearly useless as a fighter. The journey to this moment had been long and difficult. Alexander Lippisch had started designing tailless aircraft in the 1920s. Experimenting with unconventional wing configurations that most engineers deemed impractical. But Lippisch had a deeper understanding of aerodynamics than most. He realized that a tailless design could be more efficient, reduce drag, and achieve speeds beyond the reach of traditional aircraft. When the German Air Ministry sought revolutionary fighter concepts in the late 1930s, Lippisch proposed a rocket-powered tailless interceptor. The concept was radical: no propeller, no tail, powered by volatile chemicals that ignited on contact. Many engineers thought it was a suicide mission, but Germany, preparing for war, was more willing to give bold ideas a chance. Development began in earnest in 1940. The first prototypes were unpowered gliders, testing the aerodynamic design. Pilots reported that the aircraft handled differently from anything they had flown before. The controls were highly sensitive, and the aircraft had a tendency to climb unexpectedly. It felt unnatural, but once pilots adapted, the aircraft flew well. Then came the powered versions with a Walter rocket engine. The acceleration was incredible, but the risks were equally severe. Test pilots died, and aircraft exploded on the ground during fueling. The hypergolic fuel was so dangerous and reactive that ground crews wore protective suits. A single spill could kill a man in minutes. Between May 1944 and May 1945, approximately 370 Me-163s were built. They were deployed to Jagdgeschwader 400, a unit created to operate the Komet, based at Brandes Airfield near Leipzig. Their mission was to intercept American bombers attacking targets in central Germany. In 11 months of combat, Me-163 pilots achieved only 9 confirmed kills against Allied aircraft, though German records claim as many as 16. Even with the higher number, 16 kills in 11 months for a unit equipped with the fastest aircraft ever built was a failure by any standard. And it wasn't because German pilots didn't know how to fly the Me-163. It was because the aircraft's incredible speed was also its fatal flaw. The Me-163 could climb to 39,000 feet in just 3.5 minutes. No Allied fighter could match that. Once at altitude, it could dive through bomber formations at speeds no gunner could track. But the rocket motor only provided 7.5 minutes of powered flight. After 1 or 2 attack runs, the pilot had to glide back to base, defenseless and unable to maneuver. Allied pilots quickly learned to wait until the Me-163 ran out of fuel, then attack it during its unpowered glide back to the airfield. American fighters developed specific tactics to deal with the Komet. They would fly above Me-163 bases at high altitude, watching for the rocket exhaust plume during launch. Once a Komet's engine shut down, the Americans would dive on the helpless glider. Some Me-163 pilots were shot down while still in sight of their own runways, gliding home with empty fuel tanks and no way to defend themselves. The aircraft that could outrun anything in the sky became easy prey once its engine stopped. Even when the Me-163 still had fuel, its speed caused problems. The aircraft carried 2 30mm cannons, but at 700 miles per hour, a pilot had less than 2 seconds to acquire a target, aim, and fire before overshooting it. Many bomber crews never realized they had been attacked. The Me-163 would zoom past them so quickly that their gunners couldn't track it. But the Me-163 pilots often missed too, because shooting at such high speeds required reflexes faster than human biology could provide. German engineers tried to solve this problem by developing the UFist, an upward-firing weapon system with 60mm recoilless mortar mounted in the wing roots. The idea was for the pilot to fly directly beneath a bomber formation,